So we had three breakout questions on the table. What was your contemporary analysis for the reading? What is the veil and what is the work that the veil is doing? And then, in your words, define double consciousness. Who would like to start by explaining what they felt was the contemporary analysis for the reading? Sam, what did you think was this contemporary analysis for the reading?
Um, not I just what was going on throughout well, yeah, he was just basically kind of talking about what was going on, well, what he was saying going on, and how they couldn't see past the veil, or how could I word this? That they weren't able, although yeah, circumstances were changing, that they still were being repressed in many ways.
Okay, so
And
how does that relate to what's going on today, though? Because you're right about that.
it still continues.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
it's still very much, yeah, you see it all the time. It hasn't gone away.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. So, what is the veil, and how does the veil work?
I kind of seen the veil as kind of a shield, or not really a shield, but some type of like cover that not only covers to like use loose terms, not only to cover um African Americans as people, so like a cover that white people kind of can't see past. They kind of just see this as like a cover that kind of blocks seeing Black people as actual people, as Americans, as part of this society. And also not only that, but kind of not only as a cover, but as a blockage from the Black person themselves, kind of seeing that white society, white American society has kind of put this cover between them and kind of put this blockage between them and the Black community, and struggling to kind of break out of that, and struggling to kind of see that this veil, quote unquote veil, this cover, this blockage doesn't define them as a person. And I also kind of related it to how in weddings, how brides, they kind of have this veil over their face that's kind of like supposed to hide them from until like their man opens it up or whatever. Kind of just like that view of hiding their beauty, hiding like their actual selves from the audience, from the people. I kind of related it to that kind of.
Shy, I gotta tell you, at first I was like, where's she going with this? But as I listen to you, you're right. I think you approach it from a different angle, but I think what you're getting at is absolutely right, right? It's a cover that prevents one world from being able to see the humanity in another world. I also like the analogy with the wedding and the symbolism behind that. Anyone else? Your thoughts on the veil?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So in the reading, you know how they mention, or he mentions the color line? That is that the same thing, the veil that's like alluding to,
Yes. So what he's saying, Sam, is the veil, it separates,
is the
bro.
color
Yeah,
line?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So that it works in the same, it does the same thing. So when I ask
Mhm.
the question, what work does the veil do? It provides that line of distinction between the white world and the black world.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. All right. Um, Someone, in your own words, articulate what double consciousness is. How would you define this notion of double consciousness?
I would kind of go based off of like what Shai said and what we spoke of in the discussion. It was kind of this battle between I think this is a battle between two identities. Um and like the mixing of ideas and like this idea that um you know you want to be this, but unfortunately society pivots you in another way. And I think that's what the black man struggled at this time. This idea that he wants to obviously be in tune with his blackness, but at the same time, when he gets in tune with that blackness, he's seen in a way. So when you're struggling with both of those, I think this idea of like double consciousness, having two minds in one, I think that's what I get.
Yeah, spot on for bro. Thank you. Anyone else want to speak on how they interpreted this notion of double consciousness? Joseph, what do you think double consciousness is?
In the reading, I think it meant like in order to fit into the society, you had to be white and but you wanna it's called keep on practicing your black ancestry. So you're like pushed between the sword and the wall.
Okay.
You don't you have to either go to one or one, and if you choose your black ancestry, you're seen as bad.
Okay. Joseph Stewart, what's double consciousness to you?
Um, I guess kind of just like figuratively living in two different like world or realities, I guess, something like that. So
Okay.
like how you something so like you're living in one reality when you go somewhere and then you come back home or something like that. It's like you have like a whole different way of life, something like that, I guess.
Okay. Could you do you say that you embody a type of double consciousness?
Um, in a way, because like outside of home, I have like different well, not like have, but I project different like a different thought process like at home with my parents and stuff. I'm not really I wouldn't say like I was free to think a certain way, but uh I have to show or like kind of conform to what my parents kind of believe, I guess. But like with my friends and like in like school, I'm kind of more like open to like explain certain things a certain way. So I have to kind of like switch between like being less open to stuff and then going, out in the world and then just being perceived differently, I guess, if you know what I mean.
Okay. I want you all to keep this notion or this word that he mentioned, switch, in mind, and I'll bring that back up at the end of our conversation today. Gianna.
Um, for the double consciousness, it made me think about this book I read my senior year called Passing. And it's about how you basically are living like two separate lives, like adding on to what the person before me was saying, how you act a certain way at home, but then to appease everyone else in society, you act differently to kind of um, to change who you are, but to also not stand out so that people don't form specific stereotypes about you or say like, why are you acting this specific way in like a work environment, for example. So I think it just feeds into how um, people can't be themselves in public, and just the way they act is judged, and how a lot of people's um, like respect for their own identity is being pushed down because they can't truly be who they want to be.
Perfect. I think not to say that Joseph Stewart was wrong, but I think how double consciousness plays out is a lot more sinister than just having to show a layer of respect for your parents, right? Like I think we all, from certain regard, have a certain presentation in front of our parents than you have in front of your homeboys, right? But the way that double consciousness plays out is a lot more sinister. And I think Gianna points us in the right direction in the sense that it doesn't allow you to respect and value yourself. You put on a front that allows for others to feel comfortable, but in doing so, you're kind of devaluing your true essence. And I think that's important to point out. And I'm looking at the chat. And this is from Valerie says, it's being forced to live multiple lives in order to please, in order to appease general or quite white society. Sometimes you lose who you are and what you are just to be respected by others. And I think, again, Valerie, you're navigating us in the right direction in the sense of diminishing yourself. For the most part, I don't think your parents want you to devalue who you are, but there's certain rules and regulations that you're going to have within their household for that to coexist, right? And I think that's more of a respecting their space opposed to you disrespecting yourself to accommodate to their space. And that's a distinction I think should be made. But let's get into it. What you read was the opening chapter of W.E.B. Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folks. This is widely recognized as one of the most important texts in Black literature. Before I get too much into the text itself, just a general question. What did y'all think about the reading? Like, what were your just general thoughts about it? Not to be too deep or philosophical, but just what did you think about it? You like it? I didn't like it. Did you find it accessible, inaccessible? What were your general thoughts?
I like that idea of getting a thought or like a general teaching out in many different ways. Yeah. I like that he didn't just stop at one place, you know?
Gotcha. Valerie says a little dense, still understandable, maybe look inward. Okay. Anyone else? Just your general thoughts and feelings about it, the reading. Was anyone like completely lost? Like, yo, what the fuck is this guy talking about?
In some parts, just because of the wording. The
Yeah.
wording threw me off. So I had caught myself like having to go back and reread to like try and understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I agree. The language, like just the way, like the language, it was just kind of hard to comprehend.
Yeah. I appreciate y'all because y'all being honest, right? Like, absolutely. Look, keep in mind, this is published in 1903. 1903, right? And it's written like it's published in 1903. And for me, that makes it very inaccessible. Like, I think I was like maybe 20, 22 when I first picked this up. And I'm like, yo, what the fuck is this Shakespeare sounding shit? I'm cool. And I just set it back on the shelf and it sat there for years. I ended up going to a HBCU in Tennessee and I tried to pick it up again, still couldn't get it. I went into my PhD program, and for one of my courses, we had to read the whole book. And so at that point, I had to, get with it. And at that point, it began to kind of make sense to me. But I would agree, it's very inaccessible just because of how he's speaking, and it makes it very just not easy to digest. But we'll try to unpack it a little bit. But before I get into the book, I do want to centralize the importance of who W.E.B. Du Bois is. W.E.B. Du Bois is the first African in America to graduate from the University of Harvard with his PhD. Now, Du Bois is such a cold motherfucker. When he got his PhD, he told Harvard that the pleasure was all Harvard's, right? So like, fuck what y'all did for me. I did you a favor, right? Like that's how cold Du Bois was. But due to the anti-Black sentiments and due to the fear of African descended people obtaining education, Du Bois was forced to do a lot of to do his master's work. He had to get a double master's from the university, I forget the name of the university, but it's a university in Germany. At the time, Germany was recognized as one of the foremost places for their universities. So if you're familiar with sociology, you know the names of Marx, you know the names of Weber, you know the names of Engels. These individuals were the classmates of W.E.B. Du Bois when he went to get his master's in Germany. So quite literally, this is not exaggeration or hyperbole. Du Bois is quite literally the father of United States sociology. Point blank, period. Once he received his PhD from Harvard, he was commissioned by the University of Pennsylvania to do a sociological study on the Black residents of South Philly, and he produced the text called The Philadelphia Negro. The Philadelphia Negro is the first book of sociology in the United States. So you won't hear this in your sociology classes, but the truth of the matter is there would be no sociology in America without W.E.B. Du Bois. So just to kind of have you understand the magnitude of who this individual is, I want to say he died at the age of 89 in Accra, Ghana, working under Kwame Nkrumah, who was the president of independent Ghana, producing the Encyclopedia Africana. So his whole life was dedicated to educating African individuals. One of the founding members of the NAACP, one of the founding members of the Niagara movement. He attended some of the initial Pan-African congresses in the 1900s. So you really can't talk about African intellectual production within the United States without talking about Du Bois. So the book is titled The Souls of Black Folks. So we know from the book's title, he's dealing with this notion of the soul. The title of the chapter is Of Our Spiritual Strivings. This is foundationally important for being able to understand what Du Bois is up to, of our spiritual strivings. So what does it mean to strive for something? What does it mean to strive for something?
To face struggle and continue.
To struggle for something and to continue to go for it. What else? To strive. What does it mean to strive?
To work for something?
Yes, to struggle to work towards something, right? So if the title of the chapter is Of Our Spiritual Strivings, what is he saying? What does that mean? Of our spiritual strivings. And we know that striving is to work for something. So what is the title of the chapter about?
Maybe to work for like towards a meaning as a black folk in America.
But what is working for that? Of our spiritual striving. So what is working?
Can you rephrase the question, sorry?
So you're right. It's to work towards something. But the question is, what is working towards something? If the chapter is titled Of Our Spiritual Strivings, what's doing the work?
Like the soul, maybe?
Perfect. So what this chapter is going to be about is what the souls of Black folks is working for. Does that make sense? This is why he titles the chapter Of Our Spiritual Striving. So in other words, this chapter will be about what the spirit of Black folks is working towards or working for, okay? Now, below the title of the chapter, we have a Negro spiritual. Keep this in mind because that also becomes important. He starts off the chapter, between me and the other world, there is an ever unasked question, unasked by some through feelings of delicacy, by others through the difficulty of rightly framing it, all, nevertheless, flutter around it. They approach me in a half-hesitant sort of way, eye me curiously or compassionately, and then, instead of saying directly, how does it feel to be a problem, they say, I know an excellent colored man in town, or I fought at Mechanicsville, or do not these southern outrages make your blood boil? So like, again, Shakespeare, like what the fuck you talking about? But like, so let's break it down, right? So there's two worlds. Between these two worlds, there's an ever unasked question, right? So we have the Black world, the white world. The white world wants to pose a question to some Black folks, but they don't know how to do it. Some because the question is delicate, right? Some because they don't know how to frame the question, but they all flutter around it. They approach you half hesitantly, eye you curiously or sometimes compassionately, right? But instead of saying the real problem, instead of saying what you really want to say, yo, how does it feel to be a problem? They say stupid shit like, oh, I know an excellent colored man in town, or I fought at the Battle of Mechanicsville, or doesn't these Southern outrages make your blood boil? Make your blood boil? So in our time, what that may sound like, well, you know, I voted for Obama twice. Well, you know, I too believe that Black Lives Matter. In fact, I marched during the George Floyd rally. And Du Bois responds, at these, I smile, or I am interested, or reduce the boil to a simmer, as the occasion may require. To the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? I seldom answer a word. So I know what you want to ask me. How does it feel to be a problem? I don't address that. But depending on how you may come to me, I might ignore you, I might smile at your ass, or you may piss me off, which forces me to reduce my anger, my boil, to a simmer. But the real question is never addressed. He talks about how he was made aware of his blackness through the exchanging of Valentine's Day cards or greeting cards, and it was rejected, right? And he says that my word, sorry, let me go back. I was different from the others, or like mayhap in heart and life and longing, but shut out from their world by a vast veil. I rather had no desire to tear down that veil, to creep through. I held all beyond it in contempt and lived above it in a region of blue sky in great wandering shadows. That sky was bluest when I could beat my mates at examination time, or beat them at a foot race, or even beat their stringy heads. So there's a veil that separated my world from their world, right? And I knew that, but I was like, yo, fuck that veil, and fuck that veil and their world. I'm cool where I'm at. But there's times where I'm able to ascend all of this into this blue sky. And my sky was bluest. My time was greatest when I was able to beat those on the other side of the veil in examinations. So if we're taking a test, I'm going to show my intelligence by getting better scores than them. Because remember why they call us racists, because this is a competition. The other way that I might make my skies blue, is when it's time to race. And I beat them in a foot race. Or if they really tripping, I whoop their ass, right? What he's telling you, beat they stringy heads. So you have to be able to translate the Shakespeare into a language that we can understand, right? So now we know what the work of the veil does. On page 9, it is a particular sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of the other. This is the definition that Du Bois gives us of double consciousness. Looking at oneself through the eyes of the other. So for Black folks to look at themselves through the lenses that the white world looks at them. This sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of the other, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. So this is the byproduct of double consciousness. You're an American, you're African, right? You have, because of this, you have two souls, two thought processes, two unreconciled strivings. So your Africanness is working towards something, and then your Americanness is working towards something else. Two warring ideals. And he says, the dogged strength, the strength of Black folks, that's the only thing that keeps them from being torn apart by these two warring ideals. Now let's think about it. Does this notion of Americanism have its own values? Yes. Some of those values are capitalism, individualism, materialism, right? For the past few weeks, we've been learning about some of the value systems of African culture. Think back to the teachings of Ptah. Those values of being peaceful, those values of being truthful, spiritual, right? So you see how the American ideals and the African ideals, they aren't congruent. They're operating in two different polar opposite directions. This is producing the tension, the war inside the dark body that he says can tear it asunder if it wasn't for the strength of the Black individual. On page 9, at the start of the third paragraph, he clearly lays out the thesis of the text. Because remember, it's titled Of Our Spiritual Striving. So you should be attentive to trying to understand what then is the spirits of Black folks working towards. So third paragraph, page 9. This then is the end of his striving. So he's letting you know right now, I'm going to tell you what the souls of Black folks are striving for. To be a co-worker in the kingdom of culture, to escape both death and isolation, to husband and use his best powers and his latent genius. These powers of body and mind have in the past been strangely wasted, dispersed, or forgotten. So again, to be a co-worker in the kingdom of culture. Now, for those who work, is your co-worker someone who is superior than you? No. Is your co-worker someone is subordinate than you, someone beneath you? No. Your co-worker is your equal, right? So the desire of Black folks, the end to our strivings is to be a co-worker, to be equal in the kingdom of culture. What does that mean? To be a co-worker, to be equal in the kingdom of culture.
Like opportunities should be the same.
But in what regard, though, Sam? You're correct. But in what regard? Because he's very specific. In the kingdom of culture. So think about it in the terms of culture.
I'm not sure.
We might help her out. What does it mean to be a co-worker in the kingdom of culture?
Well, I think like a kingdom would be the whole world, and then like cultures, like where we all have different cultures, so treat everyone's culture equally.
Perfect. And if you look at the chat, Valerie's also pointing us in the right direction, right? You're both in the right. To have your culture respected and valued equally, right? The number one export in America, hear me out. The number one export in America is Black music. That's the number one thing that gets shipped out of America globally is Black music. That is a example of cultural expression of Black folks, Black music. This is why the chapter starts off with the Negro spiritual. So what he's saying is, let our cultural expressions, our music, our art, our food, our dance, be respected equally with every other culture's expression. So he starts off the chapter with this half-asked question: how does it feel to be a problem, right? And to this question, he smiles, seldom utters a word, or he reduces the boil to a simmer, right? But there's a shift that takes place on page 12. And the shift is the recognition that I am not the problem, but the circumstances that me and my people are placed in becomes the problem. It says, in those somber forests of his striving, His own soul rose before him, and he saw himself darkly as through a veil, and yet he saw in himself some faint revelation of his power, of his mission. He began to have a dim feeling that to attain his place in the world, he must be himself and not another. For the first time, he sought to analyze the burden he bore on his back. That dead weight of social degradation, partly masked behind a half-named Negro problem. He felt his poverty, without a cent, without a home, without land, tools, or savings. He had entered into competition with rich, landed, skilled neighbors. To be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in the land of dollars is the very bottom of hardships. So there's a lot going on there, right? One, he's had the capacity to say, let me sit back and think about my circumstances. Let me assess the situation that I'm in, right? And I realized through doing so, I'm attentive to something. The only way that I'm going to get my culture to be recognized as a coworker is for me to be myself. I can't allow this system of double consciousness to continue to make me devalue my own culture. If I devalue my own culture, how will any other culture see the value in my culture? So once he has that realization, he says, well, fuck. How is it possible, or how would one expect me to come out here and compete with all these other people who had this 400-year head start? It's bad to be poor, right? It's hard enough to be poor. It's hard to be poor when everyone's poor, right? But think about how hard it is to be poor in a world that is dependent on money. That's the problem. The problem ain't black folks. The problem is that black folks have been expected to compete in a world where everyone else has a head start. So think about this. For those of you who work, hypothetically, you have somebody who will go to work for you, but you get all the money from their labor. And this happens for like John, like, what the fuck? Yeah, hear me out, right? You have like a avatar that'll go do all your work for you, Gianna. And all the money that you make, all the money that they earn from their labor, it goes to you, right? And with that money, you could buy a house, you could put your kids through college, so that way they have the capacity to buy a house, right? You have savings, you can invest in things like 401k, you can invest in things like the stock market, right? So this is allowing you to amass generational wealth, right? Wealth that can be passed down to your children, to their children's children, to their children's children, right? All based off of the work that that individual did, and you just took the money from their work. Does this make sense? Now, imagine that the person who did all the work is expected to also put their kids through college, buy a home, have a savings, have 401k, right? Or just like all the things that you have. And then you're going to ask that person like, yo, how does it feel to be a problem? What the fuck's going on with you? How come you ain't got no savings? How come your kids ain't going through college? Why are you stealing shit? Like, so this is what the boys is trying to get us to think about. Think back to our conversation last week about this concept of race, competing for resources. So how can we compete when we have no resources to compete? I'm in a car race without a car. Is that a fair competition? So this is the shift from the Negro problem to recognizing the circumstances produce the Negro problem. He says that people thus handicapped ought not to be asked to race with the world, but rather allowed to give all its time and thought to its own social problems. It's simple. So when you see things that African people get stereotyped for, being violent, not being good with money. We haven't had the time to sit and contemplate our problem. We've been forced to compete in a world that has a 400-year head start. So naturally, there's going to be some maladaptive behaviors because we don't have the resources that everyone else has. I want to leave time for Fishbowl, and I also want to provide you with your assignment as it pertains to this reading. So remember, with your Fishbowl, you have twice per semester. You could pass one time. You could talk about what you heard in my lecture. You could talk about what was discussed in your breakout groups, or you could just read from your journal. Is there anyone who wants to volunteer to Fishbowl? All right, got Sam. Anyone else? And if not, I'll just call that on random. Anyone else want to volunteer? Okay. Andrew, are you prepared to Fishbowl? Yes. All right. And Gabriel, are you prepared to Fishbowl? All right, cool. So we'll go Sam, Andrew, then Gabriel. Sam, we're ready when you are.
Okay. I was just thoughts on how you said, yeah, how there's such a big difference in the start, how yeah, they're kind of expecting like, oh, like, well, why can't you do that? But it's like, yeah, how you said there's a lack of resources. And it just makes me think of how like all this stuff, how people and try and say like, oh, well, how can you say that racism is still alive if like we all have the same opportunities now? Like there's, and it's like, okay, yeah, that is true, but there's also limitations to those opportunities. Like, for example, separate but equal. Yeah, they were able to go to school and yeah, I guess have the same opportunities, but school wasn't the same for blacks as it was for whites. They were taught to still be kept inferior. So although like there was progression, they still burnt down the progression. Like they put limitations on it. So it's there was no way out. They was just like stuck. They were stuck.
Yeah, good call out. Thank you, Sam. Andrew?
I wanted to speak on about like how people can be themselves sometimes. I feel like this is similar to like people when they don't know their like purpose or something, they go into like doing things that they're forced to do. For example, like when a person likes to like let's say I guess play sports, I guess. Um he doesn't like he's forced to do like business instead when he's into like sports more. So I feel like they're not like how do I say it? I guess they're not like happy with doing their job or doing their career because of like they're doing something that they're not interested in.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's similar.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Gabriel?
I was thinking about what you said about being the problem in society and your avatar analogy. I guess I was thinking about how in some sense that actually is true in terms of like history, I mean, because mates and who are like watching over white families, having to do their meals, having to clean their house, and even like some sense, I guess, taking care of their kids, right?
Yes, very much so.
So I'm like I just think it's they're expected to have their own family too, and like having to take care of their household, their husbands, and I'm guessing that like they were faced with that question as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Gabriel. And I think to tie that to what Sam is saying, and then to expect these individuals to have the same type of social uplift, it's asinine, right? Like they're not provided the opportunity. They aren't even provided the opportunity to really give sufficient energy and effort to their own families, let alone build social uplift, right? So that's a very good call out. What I want to do with the time that we have left is provide you with your assignment. Another way to think about double consciousness is this notion called code switching. Is anybody unfamiliar with the term code switching? So we all know what code switching is. Okay.
No, I haven't heard it. I haven't.
So code switching for Berto, like, so y'all been dealing with me for some weeks now, right? And you hear how I talk, you hear how I interact with you. Code switching would be like for me to come to work and start talking like this. Yes, my name is Dr. Manzili, and I'm going to be your, right, like code switching because this sounds more professional. So you see what I'm saying? It may be like, yo, at home, y'all speak Spanish, but then your mom tells you like, yo, when you go outside, don't speak that Spanish. So you code switch to an English vernacular to make those outside of you feel comfortable, right? And we do these things again for comfort of the others, not for ourselves, and to ascribe to this notion of professionalism that is often tied to whiteness, right? So now that you know what code switching is, the task becomes to find out how you code switch, identify the means in which you code switch, and then don't do that shit. But here's a caveat, right? Like there's two things. Don't get fired from your job. Don't get your ass whooped, right? Like do it in a way that you're safe and maintain your sense of employment, right? But I guarantee you there's ways that you could do this and push the boundaries without losing your job or getting fucked up, right? So be creative. But when you find out how you code switch and you decide not to do so, I want you to be attentive to one, how others around you respond. Because we do this not for ourselves, we do this for the other. Because we're afraid of how the other will look at us, right? So do that and see how others respond to you. And then more importantly, see how you feel being your true self. I'm thinking about Andrew's comments, and he says that you have this purpose, and because someone tells you to do something else, it puts you off of the path of your purpose. Code switching does the same thing. You have these gifts, you have these talents, you have these skills that are innate and divinely gifted to you, and you diminish them because you want to make other people feel comfortable. Don't do that shit. See what happens. I can tell you from my experiences, 9 times out of 10, it's a good feeling. People learn to respect you for you being yourself. The way that I talk to y'all in class is the way that I'm at work. This is my work voice, right? The way that I talk to you in class would be the same way that I talk to my professors when I was doing my PhD program. No different. Cussing and all that, motherfucker, all of that. And what would happen by the middle of the semester, they saying motherfucker. Because they respect the fact of me being myself and it allows them to be themselves. So your task is to not code switch. And again, be attentive to how others respond to you and how you feel. Gabriel.
Is code switching the same as like social desirability, or is it different?
It plays out the same way, right? So you want to be socially desirable, so you'll act a certain way. And that action may be against who you truly are. So they operate in the same formation. Does everyone understand the assignment? So on Monday of next week, we will talk about the assignment, and that will be your assignment. So please, you have a week to engage. Remember, keep your job and keep safe, right? Real quick, I want to point out what we'll be reading for Wednesday's class, and then we'll call it a day. So for Wednesday, read Harriet Tubman, The Legacy of Harriet Tubman. We'll read that for Wednesday. For Monday of next week, we'll read this one. And then for Wednesday, we'll watch both of these films. So for this coming Wednesday, Harriet Tubman. For Monday of next week, Garvey and Woodson. And then for Wednesday of next week, we'll cover both of these videos. They're not readings. So be prepared to discuss the legacy of Harriet Tubman on Wednesday. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, last minute thoughts before we close? Matter of fact, Danny, close us out.
They close us out.
Close us out.
Well, I don't even know like what to say.
So look, I got one for you. How do you code switch?
Me?
Hmm.
Well, I don't really so much do it anymore, but like at first, no, like I used to like I don't know, like all my cousins they used to sound like I sound like a little white kid, but like now I don't know. I kind of just talk how I talk, and if you like it, then you like it. If you don't, I don't know. You just don't. Really.
Yeah, you don't
I
strike
don't
me.
know.
Go ahead.
More like more authentic. If I'm like when I don't code switch.
Yeah, you don't strike me as someone who code switches, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I don't.
I wouldn't think so. I appreciate it about you. And I appreciate that about you. One thing I do want to say, typically we think of code switching in racial terms, right? Like you code switch from your black accent to a Caucasian accent. That's not the only way code switching plays out. Code switching is really about accesses of power, right? So sometimes for women, you have to put on performances to make men feel comfortable. For example, you may play dumb just to make your boss feel secure in his stupidity, right? These are ways that code switching happens across gender as well. So for Gianna, just because of your positionality, your code switching may not be a racial code switch, right? It may be a gender code switch or some other axis of oppression. So be creative in thinking about how you identify, how you code switch. It may not necessarily be a racial thing. Think about axes of oppression to identify how you perform the code switching. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? All right, y'all.